I want to welcome everyone. My name is Scott France. I'm the Executive Director of the Montgomery County Planning Commission, and I'm so happy that you could join us tonight, to talk about transit-oriented development, or TOD, especially for those who are able to join us in person. It's great to see so many folks. I know there's a lot of reminders and precautions that we're well advised to heed with the pandemic, but the opportunity to see planners, local officials, and interested members of the public is so refreshing. And not to mention this great panel of participants whom you'll be meeting later. That said, I also feel fortunate to be welcoming an audience via Zoom at the same time. I know that even from the before times, as we call them, that we could never attend all the events we wanted, and some are faced with important health considerations or other obstructions. But now, thanks to technology, we have the best of both worlds. And this Planning Smarter event marks the first session where, knock on wood here, a hybrid event is going to happen. For our Zoom attendees, we request that you make sure you are on mute. We will have some Q&A opportunities later on. Before we get started, I want to give a special shout out to Lansdale, the Borough of Lansdale, and the Borough Manager, John Ernst. They are great hosts. They've not only provided us a welcome and obvious place to talk about and see transit-oriented development, but also providing this great space with all the technological capabilities that we need to hold this event. And Brian Poster in the back there, for those you can see, is our technological steward for tonight and has been so wonderful in helping get this event set up and getting us through tonight. Thank you, Brian. I'm also told I need to make two very important public service announcements. First, to inform those here that the restroom facilities may be a little tricky, but they're out the door, and actually I don't even know the exact directions. But that way, everyone here knows. Okay, great. Make sure I don't have to use them. And second, I want to thank everyone for masking up tonight. This is what's allowing us to have the event and hopefully ending this pandemic sooner than later. So thank you very much for abiding by that. This event is part of our Planning Smarter Montco 2021 program, and it's an annual series of educational programs where planning, government, and citizen communities come together to talk about important issues facing the municipalities of Montgomery County. This is the last educational Planning Smarter for the year. And I have to say that after being sidelined from our normal public events in 2020, the Montgomery County planning staff has come back strong in 2021. We've had sessions on trail access and diversity, private investment and stormwater management, the start of a new summertime tradition in presenting hot topics in planning, and now transit-oriented development. Hope you were able to make them all. We have an exciting program lined up for you today, and we have some terrific speakers and guest panelists that will be introduced in a moment. I hope that our in-person attendees had a chance to take the walking tour and see some of the exciting development happening around Lansdale and its regional rail station. If you couldn't be with us today, we're posting that brochure that will allow you to come to Lansdale anytime and take the tour and see what's here. I highly recommend it. It's a great place to be. You may not know that the Lansdale-Doylestown SEPTA line actually accounts for almost half of the county's total regional rail trips, which is pretty impressive. It also runs through 16 stations in the county, which is the most on any one line. Today, we're going to introduce you to our newest guidebook and model ordinance and talk about the opportunities that surround these stations and many others throughout the county. After that, we have assembled a great panel of planners, municipal officials, developers, and yes, even an attorney. And I think we're up to six panelists now. And they're going to share their experiences and opinions on transit-oriented development and also answer questions from the audience, both in person and virtual. So let's get started. I want to welcome our first guest who's going to utilize our hybrid virtual platform, Commissioner Vice Chair Ken Lawrence. Ken is a tremendous supporter of the Planning Commission and a staunch advocate for public transit in Montgomery County. He has been a county commissioner since 2017 and has served on the board of the Southeast Pennsylvania Transit Authority, SEPTA to you and me, since 2011, and has been vice chairman of that board since 2020. It was great to have such an important voice making those decisions. So I want to welcome, if we can bring Ken up onto the screen.
All right, am I up on the screen, Scott?
We can hear you. We can't see you yet, but we'll work on that. Go ahead and begin.
That might be best, you know, people. Okay, I'll begin. It's great to be with you all today. I am actually in downtown Philadelphia now. We had a SEPTA board meeting today. which just let out a couple of minutes ago. And it goes to the point when Scott originally asked me to provide some remarks for this event. I said, there's no way I can get out to Lansdale by the time the event starts. And Scott, because Scott always has an answer, says, well, you can do it on Zoom then. So it's great to see some of the people who were in the room. I think I saw Mr. Steve Kline there, the chairman of our planning commission. If it wasn't Steve, just tell Steve that I mentioned him anyway, and did that. But I'm happy to be here today. I consider Lansdale my original Monco hometown. I live in Plymouth now, but when my family moved to Montgomery County in 1984, we actually lived in Talamenton, but my address was Lansdale. So I told people I was from Lansdale, and it's been great to see what's happened with Lansdale since I originally got here. So a shout out to their manager, Mr. Ernst, and their elected officials as well. So Montgomery County is a very popular place to live, to work, and to have fun. And as a county commissioner, I'm very happy that I can make that claim. The recent 2020 census confirmed that we actually had a higher percentage of growth, 7.1% over the last decade, than we did in the previous decade. And usually in a mature suburb like ours, that figure would be expected to decline over time. And I think a big part of that growth is due to some of the exciting development projects we are seeing in our more urbanized town centers and downtowns throughout the county. Just looking around in places like Lansdale, where you all are today, the interest in living in a walkable neighborhood near jobs and revived downtown is sustaining attractive new development like the Madison Lansdale Station project and others. And of course, the other question we have to ask ourselves is what's the best way to accommodate growth? And most planners will agree that the answer is not paving over the remaining green fields and farmland in the county and creating longer vehicle trips on congested roadways. I remember studying the county's comprehensive plan, Monco 2040, when I first became a commissioner, and the future land use plan in particular. Its colorful array of various areas, from the regional mixed-use centers to business areas to rural resources, showed the diversity of character throughout the county. But I was also intrigued by a series of corridors dotted with multiple mile-wide circles along their length. And these were labeled rail station walk sheds. And they identified all those portions of the county that are within a half mile of a train station. The plan indicated that these areas could support a higher intensity of uses and were ripe for redevelopment opportunities based on their access to public transit. That plan represented the start of a renewed focus in recent years of capitalizing off of our relative wealth of public transportation facilities, especially when compared to our suburban neighbors. Now today, the Planning Commission is releasing its new model ordinance and guidebook for implementing transit-oriented development. Best of all, it addresses the differences in neighborhoods and commercial centers that surround our many rail stations and provides targeted recommendations for the right level of intensification around all stations that will help Montgomery County continue to grow stronger and more effectively. And as a SEPTA board member, I'm especially proud to support this effort to build off our public transportation assets. As Scott mentioned, Montgomery County is currently served by 43 regional rail stations along 6 lines, in addition to 6 more stations serving the Norristown high-speed line. SEPTA also runs 44 bus routes throughout the county. This allows a tremendous opportunity for our residents to balance their living and work lives with a mix of traveling opportunities in ways that reduce greenhouse gas emissions and roadway congestion. And I can tell you personally, the other counties actually envy the assets that we have in Montgomery County. We all know that train ridership has been severely affected by the COVID-19 pandemic since 2020, but it should be pointed out that ridership up to that point has been trending upward over the last 2 decades, rising almost 50% since 1997. It's going to take more time and certain service adjustments will be needed, but we look forward to rail's return in prominence and being a part of the growth solution well beyond the pandemic. I hope the work of our Planning Commission and its model ordinance provides local officials more tools in addressing how they can best capitalize off of our public transit infrastructure and promote exciting transit-oriented development projects in their community. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Scott to introduce today's program. And thank you again for planning around transit in Montgomery County.
Thank you very much, Ken. Glad you could join us. So we're gonna get started. I'm gonna introduce Marley Bice. She's a principal community planner at the Planning Commission. She's been with us since 2012, one of our excellent employees and a project leader on the TOD effort. And not enough shout outs can go to her for the effort she's put into this project. Marley has done planning contract work in places like Lower Merion and Jenkintown, where TOD and this type of development has really had a strong presence and been important to those communities. So I'll hand it over to Marley.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you to Scott and Commissioner Lawrence for those opening remarks. Yes, my name is Marley Bice. I'm a community planner with the County Planning Commission, and I've been leading a multidisciplinary working group within the department to craft a model ordinance and resource document for transit-oriented developments. We had community planners, transportation planners, urban designers all working on this project. And our graphic designers and communications team were also extremely important to making this event and the documents you can see on our website the best they could be. So, okay. All right, so today we'll be briefly covering what is TOD, why we did a model TOD ordinance. We'll talk about TOD trends we're seeing in Montgomery County. Then we'll introduce some of the more innovative components of the model ordinance guidebook itself. And then we'll give an overview of the model ordinance and move on to a moderated panel of local planners, developers, zoning officials, and others to learn from their experiences implementing TOD. And finally, we'll wrap up with some questions from you, our audience, and share some next steps. So first, what is TOD? We define TOD as development that capitalizes on public transit access by transforming underutilized spaces into walkable and sustainable communities with a mix of land uses, a vibrant public realm, and excellent connectivity to transit amenities. And why do a model TOD ordinance? When we started this project, that was about 2 years ago, so even pre-pandemic, we were seeing strong interest in developing around our existing train stations. Lansdale is one example of this, where we're seeing a resurgence in development really in the last 10, 15 years. A resurgence in interest of developing in our downtowns, especially near transit. People want to live, and therefore developers want to develop where they have access to transit, where they can be in walking distance to a variety of small businesses, and where there's traditional town center character. We were also seeing municipalities respond to and anticipate this type of development by writing their own TOD ordinances. Some municipalities also see TOD as an economic revitalization tool, especially now coming out of the pandemic. And this is something that has been emphasized in many of the recent municipal comprehensive plans that we've been working on. So we felt this would be a good time to take what we've learned from recent TOD development projects, what other municipalities in the region have done in response to this trend, and create a model ordinance that would support all of our municipalities to be forward-thinking in their planning and zoning around their station areas, even if maybe they aren't seeing this type of development just yet. The research and case study analyses we've done helped us to create a series of design best practices that are highlighted in both the background section of the guidebook and the model ordinance itself, in order to help guide that renewed development interest in our transit-oriented areas in a way that ensures quality design of buildings and public spaces and generally encourages efficient use of valuable land. And ultimately, the model ordinance and the TOD planning being encouraged through this project has the goal of promoting transit ridership. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Matt Popek to discuss that aspect of the project further.
Thanks very much, Marley. My name is Matthew Popek, and I'm the Transportation Planning Assistant Manager at the Montgomery County Planning Commission. And I'll take a couple of minutes to just go through a little bit more as to why this particular effort is important for our transportation system as it stands today. So why is this important for Montgomery County as a transportation? Well, as Commissioner Lawrence pointed out, we have the most SEPTA regional rail stations of any of the suburban counties, a total of 43. plus our high-speed line stations that go between Norristown and Philadelphia. If you take all of the municipalities where each of those stations already are, we have 19 municipalities, counting 31% of the total number, that already have the physical infrastructure in place for these train lines in order to make TOD possible and work. The thing about these 31% of municipalities is that they contain 46% of the county's population. And if you extend just a little bit into the municipalities that have a station just a half mile outside of their borders, we're already up to talking about 56% of the county's population is living in jurisdictions that could benefit from transit-oriented development and a zoning model ordinance. The current development patterns around our stations vary fairly widely throughout the county. We have, the Norristown and Conshohocken mixed-use centers, to Gwinnett Valley's low-density residential, to the Link Belt office and warehouse and industrial centers. We want to be able to propose workable typologies for the broad variety of sites in the county, knowing that we won't be able to transform all of the stations into dense nodes, but we do want to ensure we are properly taking advantage of our transportation network capacity without involving any sort of roadway traffic additions where possible. SEPTA itself is going through a number of large-scale planning efforts right now, as we will certainly hear about more during the panel session. We are monitoring at the county the bus revolution and the regional rail reimagining projects, and are excited to see how they can transform how SEPTA is using their particular systems to work a little bit better with the land use and transportation nexus that we have through this particular model ordinance. We have certain rail extension discussions that are already taking place for projects that are found in our comprehensive plan, Monco 2040, such as the King of Prussia Rail Project, the Phoenixville-Pottstown restoration of service, and even the Souderton-Percy restoration service. In King of Prussia's rail project in particular, we want to make sure that maximizing possible ridership is on board as the project is getting assembled. Our office itself is doing multiple studies, such as a master plan for the Moore Park region, and we've assigned the possible stations for the King of Prussia Rail Project's typologies, which are included in the appendix of the report. And finally, we're just trying to make sure that SEPTA and the communities are better able to align the capital and operations improvements that they may be making. We feel that this ordinance provides a method for our municipalities to take advantage of any of these service tweaks or overhauls whenever things are possible. As a reminder, here is the transit network as it currently stands in Montgomery County. You can see both the regional rail and Norristown high-speed line stations, as well as the SEPTA bus routes that offer frequent service above what would be normally expected as a current suburban level of service. We have those marked on this map in both the blue and gold colors, while some of the other transit routes are shown in pink. We also show the PART routes outside of Pottstown, as well as local connector routes in King of Prussia, which may become more prevalent in decades to come as the last mile transportation problem is addressed with potential ride sharing or autonomous vehicles. Some additional graphics that we have to share, and all of these are of course found in the TOD model ordinance document. Here's our chart on ridership. You can see how the patterns of ridership are spread across the county. As Scott mentioned in his introduction, the most heavily traveled line in particular is the Lansdale-Doylestown line, which we are right next to here today. But other lines such as Maniac-Norristown, Paoli-Thorndale, and even the West Trenton and other ones in the eastern part of the county receive a decent amount of ridership. And the ways that we are looking and how we represented it in our ordinance document, our ridership counts are shown as both boards and the lights together, which we understand is not the typical way to show ridership. However, we are reflecting this as the number of times that a particular transit rider or customer may be interacting with a station during the day. So if you have somebody that is able to come to a newly developed station area, grab a cup of coffee in the morning, catch their train into the city, come back out, maybe hang out at a beer garden once they get home from work, such as you can do right here in Lansdale. We see that as being the driving force for why a lot of these municipalities would want to encourage this sort of development in the particular areas. You also see on the right side of your scene some of the already existing land use characteristics within a half mile of the train stations. We already have 30 million square feet within a half mile of the train stations in Montgomery County. We already have 11 million square feet of office, 15 million square feet of industrial square footage, and most importantly, 57,000 residential units within a half mile already existing in Montgomery County train stations. So we feel like this is not just something that could happen, it's something that is already happening throughout the county, and we're trying to encourage it as much more as possible. At this point, I'm going to hand it back to Marley to start running through some of our station area typology, information, and graphics.
Thanks, Matt. So next, I wanted to give an overview of the station area typology approach that we created for this guidebook, and it's essential to interpreting the model ordinance that Claire will give an overview of next. So here's the map, similar to what Matt was just showing with ridership levels. This is showing those half-mile walk shed buffers around each station, and then the color represents the station area typology. So the counties, and this is for regional rail and Norristown high-speed line stations, where we assigned each one of the 5 station area typologies to reflect the diversity of station areas, the range of development potential, and land use patterns and characters that are present throughout the county. So regional mixed-use centers, which are just Conshohocken and Norristown right now, are the busiest station areas in Montgomery County. High density, diverse land uses and connectivity to both transit and the highway system are the key elements that make them the economic engines for the region. Town centers in blue are highly walkable station areas that are primarily characterized as local downtowns with active ground floor uses that encourage pedestrian activity. High density residential districts often abut town centers, increasing the number of residents within walking distance of the train station. Lansdale, where we are today, is an example of what we call town center typology. Suburban employment centers in yellow are characterized by a combination of large-scale employment and residential uses adjacent to a train station, creating opportunities for a live-work atmosphere. These areas often include office campuses and hotels. Neighborhood village centers in green are walkable station areas characterized by primarily low to medium density residential environments, with a small mixed-use core near the train station. In these areas, new development primarily takes place on smaller infill sites. Lastly, suburban neighborhood in purple. These station areas are typically nestled within low-density residential neighborhoods. Local retail, where present, is usually located within the train station building itself. So I know this slide isn't legible here, but if you scan the QR code in either the program or on the cover of the walking tour brochure, you can see our full report. You can zoom in on this table better, but this is a chart from our guidebook. And just summarizing the 5 typologies and major characteristics of each, both in terms of the larger context of the station area as a whole, street grid, land use mix, streetscape, as well as building characteristics, building bulk, such as height, is describing what is appropriate for each context. As I mentioned previously, through our background work and case studies, we were able to identify 5 key design elements and further refine several best practices within each design element that are key to successful TOD projects. And here are the 5 design elements that we go into in detail in that section of the guidebook. But just to recap, transit-oriented developments should incorporate a mix of land uses with a walkable network of streets at a density that boosts levels of transit ridership. Creating space for supportive uses and activities such as outdoor dining can foster a sense of place and contribute to a vibrant mixed-use district. The design and scale of buildings and landscapes within this train station area also enhances the public realm, which in turn fuels street life. Parking is also an important resource that should be thoughtfully incorporated into the development to support transit ridership, as well as the residents and visitors to the development. Now I'm going to hand it over to Claire Warner to give an overview of the TOD model ordinance.
Thanks, Marley. So as you'll see, as we go through this, the design elements and best practices that Marley just described are going to be integrated into the model TOD ordinance. The model ordinance is intended to encourage walkable mixed-use development near transit. and is organized as a standalone ordinance with its own intent and purpose statement, applicability, and definitions. The model was written assuming that it would be applied as a standalone mapped zoning district as opposed to an overlay. However, each municipality with its site context that may be different can apply it as either a standalone ordinance or an overlay as it best fits each community's needs. The applicability would be within a half-mile radius of the station area. As described earlier in the presentation, the typology approach means that there is an approach pardon for not advancing the slides. There's an approach for every municipality in this model. As we go through the outline of the ordinance, you'll see how the typologies come into play for each element to be tailored to fit each of the community's different needs. To begin with, permitted uses vary by typology and are summarized in this chart in the model ordinance, with permitted uses listed on the left and the different station typologies along the top, from most intense on the left to least intense on the right. Mixed use is not required everywhere. That depends on the building type and whether the frontage is on a primary street or a secondary street. Some of the uses are unique in this model, such as artisanal manufacturing or live work units that support transit but are not suitable in all different station area typologies. Uses that are labeled PR are permitted but regulated with additional use-specific regulations based on typologies. Some municipalities may choose to regulate these uses as a conditional use or a special exception. We don't make a distinction in this model how that's done, but that would be dependent on how each municipality chooses to apply additional regulations. Some examples of these permitted regulated uses are listed on this slide, such as multifamily buildings. They're permitted in station areas, but are required to provide private gathering space for either the residents that live there. In addition, active ground floor commercial is required along the primary streets of multifamily buildings that are within 600 feet of the station. And in suburban neighborhood station areas specifically, multifamily is limited to 8 units per building. Some uses are also regulated by size. Retail, for example, is limited to 10,000 square feet in suburban station neighborhood areas. Dimensional standards are also regulated by typology to best fit the intensity and built environment of the different station types. However, each municipality using this model will tailor the dimensions to fit the context and meet the community development goals. Dimensions are summarized in this chart in the model, and I've just highlighted a few things that specifically stand out here. This model ordinance does not regulate maximum residential density or floor area ratio or FAR, in part to encourage a mix of residential units, sizes, and prices. We felt that other dimensional standards, such as building height and impervious coverage, would adequately together scale the development to accommodate different sites. Most typologies have both a minimum and a maximum building height, again, varying by typology. There is a maximum building height by right and a maximum building height with density bonuses. Bonuses for height increases can be applied to all station area typologies except suburban neighborhood, which is our least intense station typology, for an increase of 2 additional stories. So regional mixed use, as an example and kind of an exception, can accommodate taller buildings, but we have a maximum required height of 8 stories to encourage development of some of the bonus improvements that are described on a later slide. In the first 3 station area typologies, building step back, which is where a building facade is set back an additional distance above the 3rd floor, is required. The step back in the facade is meant to mitigate the bulk of large buildings and will be addressed more on the design slide. General standards apply to all station area typologies, but are regulated differently as shown in the dimensional standards slide previously. Two-dimensional criteria, minimum frontage occupation and build-to line work together to ensure an activated commercial corridor, active street front wall, as illustrated here. Frontage occupation requires minimum percentage of street frontages that is occupied by a building. On the other hand, build-to line regulates how far from the curb that building facade can be located. And this can be increased in order to accommodate public gathering space or additional landscaping. The bonus provisions is a lengthy section that we've included that acts as a menu of options for developments to choose from in order to increase the height and density of their building. The model includes, like I said, a menu of options that some of them are listed here, but it's much longer in the document. But we encourage municipalities to prioritize the bonus options that would best fit the community development goals and needs of the community. For example, a place might want to encourage moderate income housing or public gathering space, while another place might decide to choose something that's more selective for environmentally sensitive goals, such as a green roof or alternative energy installations. The bonus system can be customized by changing the number of points that each of the bonuses can be used in exchange for. For example, the model heavily weights moderate income housing and public gathering space, but based on those goals of the community can be weighted, the different bonus options can be weighted differently. The building design standards are meant to ensure that buildings create visual interest through dimensional standards, such as building length, architectural details, and building orientation towards primary streets. There are additional regulations for primary streets. And one thing that I want to point out here on the bottom of this slide is something that we build off of for the applicability of this model. So looking at primary streets versus secondary streets. Primary streets are the ones where most buildings will be oriented towards and are really going to be the centers of pedestrian activity. And a lot of the design standards are modeled on this concept of having a primary versus a secondary street. This example is from Cricket Flats in Lower Marion, and you can see how facade articulation and the building materials is used to mitigate the mass of the building and integrate better into the existing neighborhood. Landscaping is not one of the main design features that was listed previously, one of the 5 design elements, but instead plays a role in each of the design elements, whether it's next to a building, part of the placemaking for a streetscape or public space, or buffering parking. The model emphasizes native plantings and includes 3 different buffer options to fit the context of the development. For example, if it's a small infill lot, there might be a narrower buffer option to accommodate that space. A walkable, vibrant street front is one of the key elements of a successful TOD and can be created through streetscape design standards regulating the width of sidewalks, crosswalks, and features for pedestrian comfort. Many of the retail stations also have bus lines that provide interconnections, and a critical element of a bus stop is the comfort for waiting passengers. SEPTA has developed design guidelines for bus stops, and that's referenced in the model. A good streetscape also includes space for outdoor dining, which is now more important than ever. And the design standards address how to accommodate outdoor dining while also providing adequate space for pedestrian flow. Common open space is required for any development of 10 residential units or more, or commercial developments of a certain size. The common open space needs to be 5% of the lot. And the common open spaces that's required can include pocket parks, pedestrian plazas, courtyards, and a variety of other options. Standards are provided for each of the different open space types, and public open space can also be included as one of the bonus options while it's not required. Parking is thought of as a shared resource in TOD and should be managed and designed to not detract from the transit-oriented development. Parking minimums are slightly lower than what might be common in other zoning ordinances to reflect an anticipated increase in the use of other modes of transportation. This is done through both parking management and parking design. The model goes through both shared and cooperative parking, these concepts that are based on the different peak demand, parking demand for different uses. And by allowing multiple uses with different peak demands to share parking, the overall need for parking can be reduced and more effectively use the resource that's there. Cooperative parking ensures that the management of the parking is done through different uses. There is also additional standards for calculating reduced parking requirements and maximum parking. And lastly, design standards for parking are also integrated into the model ordinance. Generally, auto-oriented spaces such as parking lots, driveways, loading zones are not permitted between the building and the street, with exceptions for transit facilities and hotels. Bike racks and electric vehicle charging stations are required, and structured parking is preferable with design standards similar to surface parking lot design standards where they need to be buffered from neighboring uses and screened. Active street front commercial is also required along the structured parking primary street side of the structured parking facility. And lastly, transportation demand management is a set of tools to encourage alternative modes of transportation that reduce vehicular trips and traffic congestion. A TDM plan, transportation demand management, TDM, is recommended for any TOD development consisting of 20 or more housing units. By requiring certain large developments to complete and implement a TDM plan will help the development identify additional resources and programmatic tools to help alternative transportation modes be easier and more accessible for users. Now I'll pass this to Patty Guttenplan, the Montgomery County Planning Commission Director of Design and Outreach and the moderator for tonight's discussion.
Thank you, Claire. Good afternoon. As Claire mentioned, I'm going to be the moderator this afternoon. And as was mentioned before by Marley, this was a team of people that worked together over the past 2 years on this model ordinance, the documents, and the web experiences and documents applications we'll be showing you as well. And as part of that team, it's been an honor for me to work with this dedicated group of professionals. It was a rewarding 2-year process. So I'm here right now to introduce our panel for today. But I first want to thank each of them for taking the time to participate in this event. Thank you. As part of the preparation for this ordinance, we at MCPC determined that it would be beneficial to have professionals outside our organization provide comments and input. So we reached out to 5 of the 7 people you see here up at the dais and asked them to review the ordinance for us. I will mention that effort as I do introduce each person, but I want to thank them for their time, effort, and dedication to the planning profession and to a better built environment. And I want to assure you that we did take each of your comments seriously. So thank you. So I'm going to start off by introducing Jennifer Dougherty, AICP. She's at the far left of the panel. She's with the Southeastern Pennsylvania Transportation Authority, as they're otherwise known as SEPTA. And she was one of our outside reviewers. Jennifer works in the Strategic Planning and Analysis Department of SEPTA, where she serves as a liaison with municipalities, planning commissions, and community organizations. She also provides a project management analysis and data on various large planning efforts, including the cycle transit plan, trolley modernization, and transit supportive communities. Prior to joining SEPTA in 2013, Jennifer worked at the Philadelphia City Planning Commission for 7 years as a community planner, specializing in civic engagement and comprehensive planning. Jennifer is also the chair of Feet First Philadelphia's pedestrian advocacy group, and a board member of the Passyunk Avenue Revitalization Corporation. Welcome, Jennifer. I'm going to move next. The next one in line is John Kennedy, and I now have these out of order, sorry. So John Kennedy, AICP, John Kennedy and Associates, planners and land use consultants, and he's one of our outside reviewers. John is the principal of Kennedy and Associates, a design and consulting firm which provides land use, zoning, and project management services, specializing in market-based solutions. John has practiced planning for 41 years and is currently vice chairman of the Lower Salford Planning Commission and a member of the Indian Valley Regional Planning Commission. John also serves on the Montgomery County Transportation Authority Board, the MCTA. Additionally, John serves as the planning consultant right here in Lansdale Borough. Welcome, John. So next in line is, should have had these in order, is Charles Guttenplan, AICP PP. He's with White Marsh Township and he is an outside reviewer. Charlie has a master's in urban and regional planning from the University of Pittsburgh and has been practicing professional land planning since 1973 when he joined the staff at the Montgomery County Planning Commission, where he was the section chief of community planning. After leaving the Planning Commission, Charlie spent 2.5 years as a planning director of Lower Marion Township. And then for the subsequent 21 years, he was a planning consultant with the Weitzman Planning Group, where he was the firm's vice president and director of planning services. There he served as a planning consultant to private and municipal clients, including primarily Montgomery County municipalities. He joined White Marsh Township as the director of planning and zoning in November of 2010 and was subsequently appointed the zoning officer and still holds those two positions. Charlie was also an adjunct instructor at Temple University's Amber campus, where he taught undergraduate courses in the community and regional planning program. Welcome, Charlie. Next on the dais is Stephen Kline, AIA, and he is our MCPC board chair. Steve is the chairman of the Montgomery County Plan Commission, so he's not an outside reviewer, but he certainly has opinions about this. He's an architect and the principal at Reagan Kline Cross LLC in Winmore, Pennsylvania. His firm has experience working on multifamily developments and redevelopment projects within a quarter mile of a regional rail station. He is also the vice president of Reagan Construction Company, Inc., a general construction company also in Winmore. Steve served 12 years, ending in 2019, as a member of the Board of Commissioners in Abington Township, 4 years as vice president. In Abington, he chaired the committee that developed a new comprehensive zoning ordinance, which included reimagining the commercial districts in Abington. Steve also served as the vice chairman of the Montgomery County Development Corporation. Welcome, Steve. Next to Steve on the dais is Pete Staz with Core Development, and he is our last outside reviewer. Entrepreneur and urban developer Pete Staz has over 22 years of experience in real estate. He has experience in real estate development, including ground-up construction, adaptive reuse, repositioning, and financing projects located in urban and suburban town centers. Pete is skilled at originating and underwriting, executing, and managing a variety of real estate transactions. In 2012, he founded Core Development with Peter Spain. Pete also has developed both market rate and student housing projects. Many of these transactions include public-private partnerships with ground lease arrangements. Core Development, its partners and affiliates, has been principals in over $200 million worth of real estate projects. Pete graduated from Ursinus College and earned his MBA at Penn State, Great Valley. He lives in Downingtown, PA with his wife and is also an Ursinus graduate and 4 children. And I'm sorry, I skipped over the attorney on the line. I apologize, Mark. Mark J. Vasoli, Esquire, law offices of Mark J. Vasoli. He was also an outside reviewer. Mark has spent much of his career as an attorney and municipal consultant and is currently the principal of Vasoli Electric, a family-based company. Mark is also an instructor for the Pennsylvania Municipal Planning Education Institute, known as PMPEI. He lives in Hatboro and has served on Hatboro Borough Council, as well as the Montgomery County Housing Authority. Mark currently serves on the Montgomery County Open Space Board. Welcome, Mark. So thank you all of you for being here tonight. And I just want to start off the question and answer session with just an announcement to those who are on Zoom. that if you have a question and you want to pose it to this group or to anybody on here specifically, or just the group as a whole, please put it in the chat and we will then take those and put those questions out as well. So, but I'm going to start off with a question that we sort of developed our own just to get the conversation started. So, do you think the market for transit-oriented development in Montgomery County is strong right now, and why? And I guess I might as well start that with the developer on the panel, because that might be the first place to start it. I'm sure others of you will have input on that, but Pete, if you want to start with that. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. First of all, I wanted to say I appreciate the opportunity to include a developer in the review of the proposed ordinance, and I'm not sure how many of my suggestions you accepted, but there wasn't a lot of work to do on it, to be honest with you. I thought it's a very progressive document and is very timely for what's going on in the world. So
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it generally speaking, you know, we talk all the time about in development, like the millennials and seniors and empty nesters moving into our buildings. And you were kind enough to include our project at Ardmore, which is obviously a transit-oriented development on Cricket Avenue. And it's, you know, it's almost a cliche how much developers talk about empty nesters and millennials moving into our buildings, but that's what's happening. The demographics have changed. It's all in the census data of what's happening, and you know, the people are getting married at a later, you know, they're pushing back marriage into young adults to maybe 29 years old. They're pushing back, you know, the size of families is reducing. So there's all these trends that are pushing towards people wanting to have smaller spaces. I think there's a stat, it's in the census data. There's a stat that 27% of the households right now are a single person. So having these smaller living spaces in walkable town centers is timely. And we saw it in Ardmore coming out of the pandemic. We leased up within 3 months, 77 units. And a lot of these folks that move in here, particularly on the empty nester side, they're moving out of single family homes. They don't want to have to deal with the maintenance of the home. They don't want to have to deal with a 2,500 or 3,000 square foot home. And we see this throughout many of the towns that you list here, particularly next to train stations, as an incredible opportunity, not only for the development community, but obviously for the communities that have these spaces. As we see, if these changes aren't made in these towns and municipalities, you're going to lose the opportunity. You're going to have folks moving to the municipality. You're going to lose folks living in these towns, and they're going to move to other towns where there's spaces to live.
Thank you. Does anybody else have a thought that we want to build on that? John?
Sure. I think that the demand for TOD type development is strong and will continue to be strong, as evidenced by what we've seen here in Lansdale. The Equus project has leased up pretty quickly. We have another 205 or 4 units coming across Broad Street next to the freight station. And I think one of the reasons why this is occurring is because millennials, but also some empty nesters are starting to look at their living expenses kind of more holistically, as opposed to just saying, I got to have a house, and then whatever it takes to support that house financially. And they're weighing, does it make sense to maybe move into a central location where we can walk, perhaps get rid of one car, and try to make adjustments in other areas of their household and their lifestyle. So I think it will continue to be a strong trend. And ironically, I think maybe COVID may actually give it a boost, because as we see more and more people working from home, being in a more walkable area is really ideal. When you work from home but you want to take a break, it's very easy to just go outside and go to a restaurant and go have coffee or whatever.
Great, thank you. Anybody else have something they want to add to that? Stephen?
So I think we're seeing successful projects. You know, he talked about the one in Ardmore, and we talked about some of the things that are going on in Lansdale. There are a couple other sporadic success stories about TOD. The problem is, and I think one of the apprehensions, and I see it mainly in the eastern part of the county because I was involved in them, is there's just this huge misconception about what TOD developments can do to a community. And I think the biggest fight out there for developers, for public officials, and even for the community that are weighing in on these potential developments is actually understanding the facts of the effects of these types of developments. And I think the more that occur, and the more data that we can gain from these projects, the better equipped the public officials, the developers, and the community are to understanding what the net effect of these projects are. There's just this initial backlash of anything to do with density that's not understood. And I think those are the tools. And I think looking at model ordinances like that's been put together by MCPC, and I would like to think I was a little bit of an insider.
You were, I'm
I mean,
sorry.
The planning commission board.
You
did
weren't
talk
from the
about it,
outside, so that's
right,
why you
through
weren't an outside
meetings.
reviewer.
You
Yeah.
know. Anyhow, but I think that giving the municipality some tools that have been put together in this model ordinance is priceless, because every municipality is struggling to try to figure out how to balance density, development, redevelopment, and what comes right down to it is tax revenue and keeping taxes low and being able to pay the bills. And I think giving municipalities some of these ideas, along with some of the facts that we talked about, or that I talked about, I think is important to see come along. So,
Well, that kind of rolls into the next question. It looks like someone else might want to say something, but what is it that you think and you each have different roles in what your work you do, that could help improve not only the availability, but then the acceptance of transit-oriented development? Any thoughts there?
so I think the first step is,
Sure.
if I was advising a client of mine, because we do some work, the initial, or way back early on, and actually John and I worked together on the Fairway Transit District, which was in Abington when we were dealing with Brandolini and a proposal, their initial proposal was 750 units. I would tell developers or I would tell clients and developers to think realistically, not necessarily lowball their development, but also just think about realistically about what the community, what the neighborhood, what the area can support, as opposed to just thinking about you're going to start here, they're going to start at zero, we'll somehow meet in the middle. That process takes forever. I mean, we saw it was 3-4 years of process and ended up not having anything come of it except a lawsuit, and then finally having it. But, finding a way to work with the municipality and the community on coming up with a number. By all means, the developer should not be working at a loss, but there is a number that's workable.
So Charlie, I could tell you want to weigh in, and then I think Mark has something to say as well. Yes. There you go.
Sorry. The whole issue of the number, I think, is a very tricky thing. Steve kind of alluded to that. People don't relate to the number. A developer is going to come in with what they want or more than they want, but the township or municipality is always going to try and push it down. But one of the things when we were preparing for this and talked about this yesterday, one of the things I mentioned is that the average person, your planning commission, your governing body, most people don't know what density looks like. Somebody says a number and the immediate reaction is, oh, that's too high. in White Marsh, we have a very successful development that was not built under a TOD ordinance per se, but was built under kind of a TOD type of ordinance that's pretty allowable in terms of numbers of uses and density, and it is around the Spring Mill Rail Station. And we have a successful apartment complex that was one of the first things built under that district in that area. And when you tell people that's 59 dwelling units per acre, they look at you like you're green and from Mars. But it doesn't look like that. But when it was first proposed, it was, obviously, there was some skepticism, and another developer, we have 3 rail stations, another developer at another rail station in the township a couple of years ago, that Pete is very familiar with and is actually working with right now, tried to convince the township that based on that ordinance, another ordinance should be put in place near the Fort Washington station to allow a very similar density. And he spent, I think it was 1.5 years trying to convince our planning commission, our board, that the same density would apply there, but it was not successful. And a lot of it had to do with perception. A lot of it had to do with the different setting, but it's very difficult to balance what public officials know or don't understand or do understand, what the public wants, and what the developer would like to get out of the project or needs to get out of the project. That's a very difficult balance. And as a person in the position that I'm in, it's a challenge to try and not necessarily sell something, but to make sure that everybody understands what's being proposed and make sure it's not just refused out of hand because of the words. In fact, in our township, transit-oriented development is a 4-letter word because unfortunately, the developer that I'm talking about that tried for 1.5 years used that term, and because his development was not successful and ultimately didn't proceed, when we were working on a comprehensive plan just 1 year or 2 later, and that term came up, the whole plan almost got railroaded because that term was in there. And if you look at our update that was adopted last year, you will not see that term anyplace. The concept is in there, but the term is not used, and it's all a question of perception.
Interesting. Mark, did you have something you wanted to say about that? You need to turn on your mic, though. Yeah.
Just to take off what Charlie said, perception, and we're at advantage now. We have had several developments already, transit-oriented developments. In Hatboro, there was proposed the stove works, and it was not greeted warmly, to say the least. There were people who were giving me a hard time at the time when I was on borough council. And we did our due diligence. We went to projects that the developer said, it's going to look like this. And I think that tangible aspect is what people need. There's an expression of picture tells 1,000 words, picture tells 1,000,000 words. And going to a site for like developments like we did today, that tells 1 billion words. I remember that Lansdale train station years ago. To say the least that it needed some work is an understatement. Hatboro, Jacksonville Road in Hatboro had the comprehensive plan in the 70s called it an area needing some assistance. And that was, again, a gross understatement. But I think it's like having pictures like that. When they see that, they have a better idea what's going on.
Yeah, and I also, we're hoping that with the document that we are introducing this evening, that sort of those best practices, those design elements that create that space that's attractive, because those are those experiences you need. Those are the projects you need to have happen to convince people that it is a good thing. So, and then the economic piece. Jen, I wanted to like bring you into the conversation with what SEPTA as a transit agency might be able to do to help this people accepting TOD a little bit more.
Thank you so much. I just want to congratulate Montgomery County on an excellent work product, and we're really excited to be working with our partners moving forward. SEPTA this week has launched our transit supportive community development project. We put out the press release on Tuesday. Hopefully that dovetailed well with today's event.
Yes.
And next week we will be hosting a webinar to launch this program. I think from SEPTA's point of view, we're able, the service is what unlocks the potential of the land. And so a lot of what we're going to be really discussing through our transit supportive communities is talking about the quality of service, the frequency service, and the variety of services that we provide. And that really fitting into exactly what Montgomery County is talking about with their typologies, that you want to have what fits for the appropriate communities. And a lot of that has to do with the number of transit options, the frequency of those transit options, as well as having a great pedestrian and bicycle network, which we can see right here in Lansdale. We have buses coming together, we have trains coming together, we have a beautiful Liberty Bell Trail and an excellent pedestrian network. And that all leads in Lansdale to having special attributes that, like I said, unlocks the development potential of the land, the density, the mix of uses, and the liveliness of the community. And everything's about being appropriate to the community, having beautiful renderings, having images. You're not only selling an individual development, you're selling a whole lifestyle that comes along with that. And that can appeal to folks who are empty nesters, young folks who care about the environment. That may be their number one concern. And people who just want to be able to live an active lifestyle, bike places, walk places, and not have to do every trip in a car. SEPTA also owns some land. We don't own as much land as some other transit authorities, but we're hoping this plan will also help us direct how and if we should develop our own properties, in addition to encouraging all the municipalities that we serve to have transit more supportive communities around our services.
Great, thank you. And again, I'm glad that you mentioned there is that webinar. I think it's next Wednesday, correct? At
Yes.
noon? Yes. So, and we just put a link in the chat. So please tune into that, because I'm going to be, and I'm sure it's going to be really interesting and exciting to
And
launch
Andrew
that.
Sekla from the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission, who's in the audience, will also be a part of that
Very
panel.
Good. I know have we gotten any questions in the chat? I was going to pose one more question before we looked at those. Oh, that would be fine. So is there anybody in the audience having seen our presentation that has a question that would go to an individual on the panel, or put it out to the panel and let them decide? Anybody? Don't be shy. Okay. Well, let me pose another question then. So one of the things that was mentioned as part of our bonus provisions was the possibility that maybe there could be certain things that could be bonuses. And one of them was sort of affordable or attainable housing. And so I guess the question is, what can communities do to encourage that more equitable housing in some of these areas? I mean, I know it can be a bonus, but are there other things that maybe that need to be talked about that will help that happen in some of these developments? Charlie, you want to start it off?
Yeah, just very quickly, I'm not sure what the answer to your specific question is about how to make sure we get affordable housing in transit-oriented developments, but I think the idea of bonuses certainly helps. But when you think about a lot of the people that are reliant on trains and not necessarily taking trains and public transit as a choice, but because it's the only choice that they have, I think it's much more important to realize that we don't just want luxury housing around transit stations. And I think that's been perhaps one of the drawbacks or disadvantages of a lot of the TOD developments in recent years, is they've been really geared, the residential portions have been really geared to the luxury market.
Right. Yes, Pete.
Yeah, and I think it's very, when you look at the trade-offs that have to be made for the cost of providing a certain AMI or affordability, usually it comes down to taxes, height, parking, and some of those things get very difficult when you talk about that in suburban communities. I know the city of Philadelphia has been pretty progressive at trying to push some of those initiatives and has some of those bonuses written into their code. And there are many instances where those bonuses are being utilized, but certainly not enough. I did want to echo something that Charlie had talked about earlier. I'm changing subjects real quick,
That's fine.
but I do think that the messaging of density and how it's communicated from political leadership and to constituents, it's of the boroughs and municipalities is so important. And I was in a meeting last year in Chester County and at a planning commission meeting, and I think it was the Exton West Whiteland Township manager stood up, and they built thousands of apartments over the last couple of years, and they're getting a lot of heat from some of their constituents about the number of apartments that all came at once, which were all sorely needed, and they're all filling up. But she spoke very directly and said, look, understanding, please help us with communication to how can we communicate why this density is important and why we need to do this. And even if it's just bullet points to the council members, to the staff of all these different municipalities. As I had talked about earlier, the demographics are changing, and that's why all these apartment buildings are filling up. It's why they filled up in the city and why they're filling up in these suburban towns. And people do not, I mean, it's hard to see it because the housing market's so hot, but people want smaller living spaces and they're going to go somewhere. And I think Steve had mentioned rateables. These developments are financial windfalls to the municipalities they go in. In Ardmore, I think we have 77 units. I think we have one student under 18, and we're paying, I think, $350,000 in property taxes.
Well, that seems to be like one of the ways this conversations have been going is that, your own experience is that the people that are coming into these developments are either empty nesters or they're millennials, and there's not a lot of kids. And most municipalities, when they think of new development, are always worried about what the strain is going to be on the schools. And so, but I think it seems like there needs to be more of that messaging where it's the money that's coming in without hitting your services needs to be a little more strongly said when that development comes in. Steve, did you? Yeah.
I think there's something else. I mean, he kind of alluded to it, but most of these projects are occurring when they occur around these train stations, especially train stations that have some of the activity that you see in the, I guess, whatever colors they were, but in the more active train stations, Lansdale, I think Noble down near Abington, Norristown, stuff like. Assemblage of those properties around those areas is costly and time consuming. And that is a contradiction to trying to create affordable housing. There's this, and Charlie's right, around these train stations, people that could use affordable housing very often don't have cars, need public transportation, and it would be a perfect location for them. So I think there is that contradiction. I think there's some tools that municipalities can look at. I know we've done a couple of LERTA projects where there's tax incremental on the raised property taxes. There are things that can be done, but it also needs to be understood that sometimes putting these projects together, I think of, what is it, the station at Willow Grove, I think is the name, that just got finished in Willow Grove in Upper Moreland. They assembled 11 properties in that area to create that project. And it took, I don't know, it took something like 2 or 3 years for Petrucci to put together those properties. So there is a fair amount of investment put into these projects, and it makes it difficult to not have rateables that are higher. It's also one thing I just wanted to mention, the millennial generation, I think, if I remember correctly, has the lowest car ownership of any generation in modern history. If that doesn't tell you something about where they want to be located,
Right.
I mean, that's the market coming ahead of us.
Well, one of the things that, and I'm happy to have someone else comment, but one of the things that was a specific thing we did in this model. And again, it was deliberate, because many of you who did the reviews sort of said, hey, why aren't you putting like a density in here, a density? And that was deliberate for a reason. And the thought was that if you regulate building height and then coverage, then that gives a developer sort of the freedom to put whatever, to have a mixture of units, that as opposed to then they're just going to go for the density and they're going to make them all luxury. So we're hoping that might be one of those tools. I mean, of course, there's only so many tools only so many things that zoning can do to make this work. But that was a deliberate thing, and as our group discussed this. So yeah, John.
That was one of my comments you did not incorporate.
Yes.
We actually did have a little bit of a bad experience here in Lansdale with an ordinance that we have in place, which is the downtown business overlay. And we did have a developer come in, and the district already has a lower parking requirement. They came in and went to the zoning hearing board and asked for an even lower parking ratio. And they coupled that with the use of automated parking, which is parking on pallets in 3 dimensions. So if you can imagine being in a gymnasium and you've got a few empty spaces and cars are going up and down and all over. And we were just astonished at what they were able to put onto the parcel. It's about a 44,000 square foot, 45,000 square foot. And their density worked out to be 174 DU per
Whoa.
acre. By and far, it would be the densest project in Montgomery County. The Equus, to give you an idea, the Equus is about 24 DU per acre, I believe.
And that's the one right here in Lansdale that we
Right,
toured.
right.
Mhm.
And they use the same ordinance. They just didn't, they weren't as aggressive. And so we actually have taken the step that we amended the ordinance, and we did put in a density, although it's still extremely generous. The density, because we looked at all the high density projects in the county, and we gave it a base density of 50 DU per acre. And then we kept the bonuses, and we allow up to 75 DU per acre. So that's still something that, somebody can do.
Yes.
I guess it remains to be seen whether the land value per square foot in Lansdale can actually support the cost of automated parking. There's only one of those in the Delaware Valley, or in Philadelphia right now, in Washington Square. So we'll have to see. The project has not started. They have full approvals, and we're all just waiting. But I wanted to go back just real quickly to your comment about affordability. One township and district that has tackled this is Upper Dublin Township. They do offer a bonus for affordable housing in their Fort Washington Office Park District. And it's actually, it's somewhat successful. They really do have developers trying to use it and are willing to use it. So I think something like that might be a step in the right direction. Maybe even limiting some of the amenities so that projects are not too costly, because Charlie has a very good point that some of the things really are geared far too much for for the luxury market.
Right.
So, but I agree, it's something that needs to be worked on, and it just is going to take a little bit of tweaking and fine tuning in the process.
Okay, Scott? Yeah, we do. Thank you. Mark, do you want to go to the, yep. Oh, sorry. Yep, yes. Well, hold on. Let me, so we want the people who are out there to hear you too. Is it on? It is on. There we go. There we go. Thank you.
All right, so Mark Fennell, Lower Salford resident, but question in terms of, you talked about some of the density, some of the the aspect of kind of incentivizing the developer part of it. By not having a cap, is that something you would see where you're going to look at and say, maybe we can build more and have more density and have more people close to the train station as opposed to the luxury? Is that provide an incentive as a developer to do that?
I just want to make sure I understand the question, not having a cap on for affordable housing.
Right. I mean, I think you were talking about part of the challenge was that the tendency to go toward the luxury side. I'm not sure as a developer, you're trying to get the best value for the land they're going to put out there. By allowing greater density, is there an opportunity to increase the number of people that are actually able to take advantage of being close to train?
Sure. Yeah, I think the trade-offs are taxes. The things that always stop a project for us are when you start looking at, they're always the things we're trying to overcome. It's trying to park the project and pay for the parking and the taxes. Those are two of the biggest things hurdles we have to get over. So there's some pretty big levers that townships can pull and boroughs. It's just a question of when parking comes up, it's a dicey conversation. Now, the fact that it's next to a train station, there's a lot of arguments for that. So it's just being able to pull enough levers that pay for that. Because when you start to look at the AMI, if it's 80% AMI, 60% AMI, it's a pretty big discount, and it's something that we quantify, and okay, well, you have this loss in rent. How do you pay for that loss in rent? And how are you gonna make up that difference? So you could add a story, you could park less cars, and there's very clear delinear costs to each one of those decisions. So it's just, I think that the challenge that we run into when we get into those conversations in townships and the suburbs are you willing to make those sacrifices to have less parking at a site? Are you willing to do that in return for allowing us to provide affordable housing? I think that's where the conversation usually comes to a stop, because we haven't found that the townships and boroughs are willing to make those sacrifices yet.
Thank you.
Thanks. Mark Castle from SEPTA. I wanted to go back to the discussion about language and transit-oriented development and kind of put a question in that context. I think one of the reasons that SEPTA, and Jen can tell me if I'm wrong about this, that we've stayed away from the terms transit-oriented development is because of some of the things that have been raised here, but I think also that it raises a broader context to the issues involved in the development activity and the viability of communities around train stations, around the multimodal hubs like we have here in Lansdale. I wanted to get a sense from the panel, and in some extent, this is really a question too for the Planning Commission, is how we see the model ordinance and the activity of transit-oriented development in Montgomery County being a catalyst to deal with issues with the existing housing stock, the existing business development that's in the communities around where these projects are being proposed. Is it going to be a rising tide lifts all ships? Is that where we really want to go with this? And then when you do that, you kind of have to make sure you avoid that gentrification issue that kind of pops up where people feel like they're getting squeezed out from a tax standpoint or otherwise. But how does this fit in with what's already in a Lansdale? And how does this change the communities for the better? I guess it's a big question, but I want to get a sense of the context of how this work fits into the existing community activity base structure, housing, et cetera, so that we can make sure that we have strong communities, not just for new development, but for the people that are already here.
Well, I think I'll let Scott France, our director, start that answer, and then others can fill in.
Yeah, I heard you say Planning Commission, so it gives me the chance to jump in here. Yeah, you raise a lot of good points, and I think it does, in a lot of cases, what we've seen is it does raise those other ships. I live near Ardmore and have seen some of the projects and Pete's project there as well. And the development that's occurring there is providing great, you're seeing more restaurants open, more service businesses come into what, vacant spots or new spots. And, it's that, more obvious correlation, more people equals more foot traffic, more business. And this kind of development promotes that, I think, to the, exponential level, because you really are seeing people on feet and, connecting to these other developments and places around, not just the TOD itself. And so I think it does certainly have that capability. When we looked at some of the numbers and try to figure out, is there a way to express the value of TOD, as being a positive benefit for a municipality? Well, you can get to those numbers, and I think those are provable. But you can also look at the surrounding improvements. When those other businesses rise up, when you see other jobs come into an area because of that, consensus of development that's happening, then that's more to the municipality. More whether it's an earned income tax or whatever it is. But yeah, I think that's the aspect. You do have to worry about the gentrification a bit, and there's a little bit of a side to me that wants to fully buy into this, and I know you can kind of go back and forth with it, but creating more housing stock is something we definitely need right off the bat. And yes, a lot of this comes in at a higher rate, a lot of it's luxury, but I still think we benefit from the production itself, in that those are units that people who can afford them are moving into. That might keep them away from, in Ardmore's case, the lower income areas where people might be trying to redevelop or put a more expensive home and knock down an existing more affordable area. So the township struggles with that, and they're actually doing a lot to address it. But it's I think there's still a benefit, if not as direct as if we actually had the units being built, which would be ideal. But it's still a benefit, I think.
Since Mark also called me out, I'll just say that, it's very purposeful when we were discussing formulating this program at SEPTA, that it not just be called TOD, that it, because that phrase can be weighted, and we knew how it had played out in our partner municipalities and counties. But also, we didn't feel that it was all encompassing of everything that we wanted the program to do. We also really want to look at our high frequency corridors. And so TOD often comes with the connotation of having that station area with that certain buffer around it. And we wanted to also make sure that this program included things like Boulevard Direct, and included our trolley lines and the Norristown High Speed Line, where if you were to put those buffers around our stops, it just becomes a big, long line along our corridor. And I think a lot of what we also want to encourage is that SEPTA and our predecessor organizations, these lines, these services, these stations existed often before the invention of the private automobile, and certainly before the rise of private car ownership. And so a lot of this is about preserving existing fabric, existing communities, and making sure that our commercial corridors are supportive of the transit services that have been there often for over 100 years, and not turning into strip malls, drive-throughs. We want to be able to have a say in the character of the corridors that we serve, and not just be about, what's happening right at the doorstep of a train station. So we wanted it to be more encompassing. And I think it's a complex program, but like Scott said, that we need housing, and more housing makes things generally more affordable, but we do need to take proactive steps to ensure that there is affordable housing for all folks. And I think that as a government agency, as an owner of public lands, that's something that SEPTA needs to take seriously when we are considering development of our property.
Oh, great, thank you.
I think
John.
another aspect of TOD that can be advantageous is that it can also be used for redevelopment. We actually have 3 train stations here in Lansdale, and 2 of the projects, the one down the street here, the 200 units, that was a brownfield site that was vacant for a long time. And that particular solution was really excellent in terms of dealing with the environmental issues. The same thing with the the project down at the Pembroke Station, which is Station Square. At one time, that was a Ford factory. So it kind of depends on where the site actually is. Equus was a parking lot. The trade-off there was the parking authority gave up that parking, but then it was regained elsewhere. So it can actually be a great mechanism for redevelopment, development of brownfields sites.
Thank you. Mark, yeah.
You talk about gentrification. What's the opposite of gentrification? That's a bad situation as well. I worked in communities as a municipal manager where communities were treading water like that and losing ground. It's an even more difficult problem to take on. Most of the state of Pennsylvania is losing population. It's not true in this part of the state. We're under a different situation. So, you know, they look at us around here as like a three-headed being from outer space. I think it's okay to have good projects that, yeah, maybe upscale. You don't want them all upscale, but maybe they make that community better. And if they make a community better, and they may be on the forefront of leading that community going forward, community gets better, private investment will come and invest in that community even more. And again, I think that's kind of lifting of all boats.
Thank you. Yeah, Steve, yeah, and then maybe everybody, like Charlie, Steve, and
I would
everybody
agree
else,
with what
last
Mark
few
said.
comments. Yeah.
I would agree 100%. I mean, if you look at most of these TOD or higher density projects that are around train stations, I guarantee you that most of the population moving into those does not resemble the population of the surrounding neighborhood of those train stations. It's just not the case. I think you're seeing a more diverse population coming in, meaning age groups, you know, whatever it may be, which is bringing change to the economics of that area and more possibility for redevelopment along main streets and commercial districts and bringing more energy into those areas. I think those are some of the positives to the development, but I do think that they are changing the demographics from they're a different demographic than necessarily what's around them.
Thank you. So I am conscious of the time. It's 10 after 6, and I want to be respectful, even though we've gone over already. But I knew that this discussion would be hard to stop once we got started. But I want to take a moment again to thank each of you for your time commitment here tonight, your time commitment when we reached out to you to review our model, and all the great input you gave us. So I'm going to turn it back over to Scott to wrap some things up.
Thank you, Patty, and thank you, panel. This has been a great discussion. I've really enjoyed hearing all of your perspectives, and I hope the audience got a lot of value out of that as well. I just want to wrap up real quickly and let you know that we're not done after tonight as far as TOD goes, not by a long shot. Although our team might want to take a few days off and maybe skip a bi-weekly meeting once or twice. But we have a website set up. It was just opened up today. It's at montco.pa.org/planning TOD, all one word or all no spaces. And that is going to be the homepage. The Lansdale walking tours up there. We're going to create more walking tours over time to go to other areas in the county, as well as post new resources and any changes. We consider this a bit of a living document as we continue to learn more and have more examples to share across the county. I'm not able to get the sharing going, but that's okay. On that page, there's a web experience that you can go to. It's a more graphical version of going through the document, which is 100 or so pages with the model ordinance. So feel free to check that out. I think it's a pretty fun way to explore the issue and see some of the content that was developed. And I want to finish by acknowledging both the team that you heard from on staff tonight who's been working so hard on this project. It's not just them as well. I want to acknowledge Anastasia Summers, our principal graphic designer, who helped put a lot of the great looking and informative graphics into the document. Jason Emmel, our GIS coordinator for this project, who worked on the web experience, and also Rita McKelvey and Troy Woodyard, our communications team and website programmers. A heartfelt thank you for all the work they put into it as well. So with that, again, thanks for coming out. Thank you, Lansdale. This has been a great place and really happy to have you and have us. Thank you.